I'm sure there are things I could do better. I'm sure there are things I could have said better.
Joni Lamb just dropped a bombshell in an interview that left fans speechless and furious. What she said on live camera wasn't just unexpected. It was something that made people question everything they thought they knew about her. Comments exploded within minutes, fans demanding answers, some even calling for her to step down. Was it a slip-up, or did Joni reveal her true self live? Stay with us as we break down what really happened. For years, Joni Lamb stood as a symbol of faith and family on Christian television, building a carefully crafted image that inspired trust. She would speak about hope, integrity, and living according to God's plan, while viewers at home felt connected to her warm, confident presence. But all of that started to shatter when shocking allegations came forward, shaking the very foundation of the image she worked so hard to protect. It started when Jonathan and Susie Lamb, Joni's own family members, stepped forward with claims that there had been abuse happening within the family and that it was covered up to protect the Lamb family's reputation. These weren't just rumors floating around on the internet. These were serious allegations that included harm done to Joni's granddaughter, with claims that, instead of seeking justice, the family chose silence to keep their public image intact. For viewers who had trusted Joni for years, seeing her family as an example of unity and faith, this news felt like a punch to the gut. People who once looked up to Joni as a spiritual leader found themselves asking, how could this happen under her watch? And how could she preach about faith while ignoring cries for help in her own family? It didn't take long for the police to get involved, turning what was once a private family matter into a public investigation that Joni could no longer control. As the investigation unfolded, the details were unclear, but the damage to Joni's reputation was immediate. The image of Joni as a strong, faithful mother and leader was now overshadowed by doubt and confusion. Her response did not help either. Instead of acknowledging the pain within her family and addressing the allegations directly, Joni denied the claims, calling them false and accusing Jonathan and Susie of trying to tear the family apart. This only made people more suspicious. The lack of transparency, combined with her dismissive attitude, felt to many like she was hiding something. People who had followed her faithfully began to see her differently, questioning if the Joni they saw on screen was the same person behind closed doors. Social media was flooded with comments from viewers who felt betrayed, hurt, and confused. They wanted answers, but instead, they received carefully controlled statements that avoided the details of the case. For many, it felt like Joni was more interested in protecting her image than seeking the truth or healing the hurt within her family. As the police investigation continued, the questions grew louder. Viewers who once felt inspired by Joni's words were now questioning if those words were genuine. Could a person truly speak about faith, forgiveness, and family while allowing such darkness to exist within their own home? The allegations forced many to reconsider their support for Joni, creating a divide between the image she projected and the reality now unfolding. This was not just a scandal. It was a moment that changed how people saw Joni Lamb forever. The trust she had built over decades was now fragile, and the community that once rallied around her began to step back, waiting for the truth that Joni seemed unwilling to fully share. For many, the heartbreak wasn't just about what happened within the family, but about realizing that the spiritual leader they trusted may not have been as transparent as they believed. For years, Daystar grew because people believed in its mission. Donors tuned in daily, feeling part of something bigger than themselves, sending in checks and online donations with the hope that they were helping spread God's word. Joni Lamb, with her warm smile and strong words about faith, made people believe that every dollar was going toward helping others. Churches partnered with Daystar, Ministries trusted it as a safe place, and viewers felt proud to support what they thought was a mission rooted in integrity. But that trust started to crack when rumors began swirling about how funds were really being used behind the scenes. It started small, with whispers on social media that money from donations wasn't always going to the causes shown on TV. Then, stories began to surface about Joni's personal expenses, trips, and lifestyle, with claims that ministry funds were tied to her personal life, including her sudden remarriage to Doug Weiss after Marcus Lamb's death. Donors who once felt excited to give began asking, where did my money actually go? They started to notice things they hadn't before. Joni's expensive clothes, her trips, and the lifestyle she showcased on social media no longer matched the humble, faith-driven image she presented on TV while asking for donations. Some people who had given sacrificially, skipping family vacations or tightening budgets to support Daystar, began to feel betrayed. The timeline raised eyebrows too. Marcus Lamb's death was followed quickly by Joni's marriage to Doug, paired with a lavish honeymoon and travel photos that left many viewers uneasy. When documents surfaced showing ministry credit cards being used around the time of her personal travels, the questions turned into demands for transparency. People wanted to know how much of their donations were being used for ministry versus personal luxury. Daystar tried to respond with vague statements, insisting the ministry was continuing its work and that allegations were false. But these responses only made donors angrier. They didn't want rehearsed statements, they wanted clear answers and accountability. Many began calling the ministry directly, writing letters, and even taking to social media to demand refunds for what they felt was misuse of their contributions. The backlash grew as former donors shared their stories online, saying they had given thousands over the years, believing they were helping build churches, fund missions, and broadcast the gospel. Instead, they now felt that their money had gone toward funding a lifestyle they could never afford themselves. Photos of Joni at high-end events, expensive clothing, and first-class travel contrasted sharply with the simple, faith-filtered image viewers thought they were supporting. As these stories spread, some donors began contacting lawyers to see if there was a way to reclaim their donations, treating them like investments made under false impressions. Online groups formed where donors shared resources and drafted letters demanding Daystar release a full audit to show exactly where every dollar had gone, especially during the period surrounding Marcus' death and Joni's remarriage. Churches that once partnered with Daystar for fundraising also started pulling back, advising their congregations to pause donations until clear answers were provided. Ministries that aired on Daystar quietly started pulling their shows, not wanting their names tied to a network under such heavy financial scrutiny. For a network built on trust, this was devastating. Behind the scenes, staff at Daystar felt the pressure too. Morale dropped as questions grew louder, and some employees began looking for new jobs, worried about their reputations being linked to the controversies. Meetings turned tense as leadership tried to manage the crisis, but Joni's refusal to provide a clear, detailed financial breakdown only deepened the frustration. Instead of addressing the concerns directly, Joni leaned on spiritual phrases, saying things like, "God's plan will prevail," and framing the backlash as attacks from the enemy. While these words might have comforted some, many saw them as a tactic to avoid accountability, using faith as a shield instead of facing the hard questions with honesty. As the pressure continued to build, media outlets began investigating the financial operations at Daystar. Journalists reached out to former employees who confirmed there were concerns about how funds were managed, but said they were often silenced when they tried to raise questions internally. These reports fueled further distrust, and the calls for financial transparency turned into a major crisis for Joni Lamb. The reputation of Daystar, once seen as a beacon for faith-driven media, began to crumble. The network tried to carry on as usual, but viewers noticed changes in programming as Ministries pulled out. Social media was filled with comments from people asking why their favorite shows were leaving and what was happening behind the scenes. The silence from Joni only made it worse. Donors began to see their giving in a new light, realizing that what they thought was helping spread faith may have been funding a personal lifestyle. Many paused their donations, refusing to support the network until clear answers were provided. The calls for refunds weren't just about getting money back. They were a cry for accountability, honesty, and integrity from a ministry that had asked for their trust. Joni's public stance during this time, sticking to vague statements and spiritual slogans, further alienated many. People who had supported her for years felt dismissed and disrespected, their genuine concerns treated as attacks rather than opportunities for transparency. The situation turned into a cycle. The more Joni tried to protect her image without addressing the concerns, the more trust was lost, leading to further backlash and more calls for transparency. This financial controversy became a defining crisis for Joni Lamb and Daystar. It was no longer just about allegations or rumors. It was about the erosion of trust that had taken decades to build. Donors, ministries, and viewers who once stood by Joni began to step back, unwilling to continue supporting a network that refused to provide clear, honest answers. The damage was done, and for many the trust they once had in Joni Lamb would not return easily. The community that once saw her as a leader of faith was now demanding accountability, transparency, and humility. Without it, they could no longer support the mission they once believed in so deeply. For years, Daystar was seen as a trusted platform where ministries, pastors, and Christian leaders could share their messages with the world. It felt like a family, a place where God's word was broadcast daily, and where ministries felt safe, knowing their teachings were in good hands. Joni Lamb had positioned herself as the face of that trust, standing beside ministries and churches, encouraging viewers to tune in, donate, and support the mission. But as controversies around Joni and Daystar grew, that trust began to break apart. At first, it started quietly. A few ministries began to step away from airing their programs on Daystar, giving reasons like scheduling changes or new directions. It seemed harmless, but behind those polite statements was real fear. Ministries started to realize that being associated with Daystar might damage their own reputations if they didn't act fast. Viewers started noticing too, asking questions like, "Why isn't this pastor's show on anymore?" Or, "Why are so many programs disappearing from the lineup?" Ministries that had once seen Daystar as a partner in spreading God's word were now seeing it as a risk. They were getting messages from their own donors and supporters, asking them to explain why they were still connected to a network caught up in financial and personal scandals. Behind the scenes, pastors and ministry leaders were having tough conversations with their teams. They knew that continuing to air on Daystar could lead to backlash, with viewers questioning their integrity for staying connected to a platform under fire for allegations of financial misuse and leadership issues. Some leaders felt a spiritual conviction that they could not remain associated with Daystar, while so many questions remained unanswered. Timeouts, breaks, integration sessions, and weekly meetings were incompatible with rapidly changing times. As more ministries left, the pattern became clear. It wasn't just a few shows here and there. It was a wave of trusted voices pulling away to protect their ministries and reputations. Joni tried to keep the network running as usual, appearing confident on air and hosting programs as if nothing was wrong, but viewers could feel the change. The programming felt thinner, with reruns replacing shows that once brought in dedicated audiences. The damage to Daystar's reputation grew as ministries pulled out. Each departure was a silent statement to viewers that something was wrong, that trusted leaders were no longer willing to stand beside Joni while controversies continued to swirl. The more ministries left, the more the public questioned what was really happening behind the scenes at Daystar. Churches that had partnered with Daystar for fundraising and broadcast opportunities also began to reconsider their relationships. Pastors advised their congregations to be cautious about sending donations to the network, with some even suggesting redirecting funds to other ministries with clearer accountability. For a network built on trust and donations, this shift was devastating. Joni's strategy during this time was to remain silent on the specifics, leaning on phrases about faith and perseverance while refusing to address the concerns directly. She would appear on broadcasts, speaking about staying strong in the face of attacks, framing the controversies as spiritual warfare rather than acknowledging the valid concerns being raised by ministries, donors, and viewers. But ministries were not satisfied with vague reassurances. They wanted transparency and accountability, and when they didn't get it, they chose to walk away. Some pastors, who had been friends with Joni, found the decision painful, but they felt they had no choice. Protecting their congregations and the integrity of their ministries had to come before loyalty to Daystar. Behind the scenes, the environment at Daystar became tense. Staff felt the pressure of the shrinking lineup, with meetings growing more intense as leaders tried to figure out how to replace the content being lost. Some employees, worried about their own reputations, quietly started looking for jobs elsewhere, not wanting to be tied to a network that was rapidly losing credibility. Viewers who had watched Daystar for years felt the changes deeply. They missed the variety of teachings and worship programs that had once filled the schedule. Social media filled with questions and concerns, with viewers asking, "What's happening at Daystar?" and "Why are so many ministries leaving?" The silence from Joni only made it worse, leaving viewers feeling ignored and disrespected. The departure of ministries also signaled to viewers that the controversies were serious. If trusted leaders felt they had to leave, viewers started questioning whether they should continue watching or donating. It created a cycle. As ministries left, viewers pulled back, donations slowed, and Daystar's position weakened further. For Joni, this was a devastating blow. She had built her platform on relationships with ministries, using those partnerships to strengthen Daystar's reach and credibility. Losing those partnerships meant losing the heart of what made Daystar feel trustworthy to so many. It also meant losing the audiences those ministries brought with them, reducing viewership and the financial support that came with it. Instead of using this moment to address the controversies and rebuild trust, Joni doubled down on avoiding specifics, hoping the storm would pass if she ignored it long enough. But with each passing week, the damage grew. Ministries continued to leave, donors continued to demand answers, and the viewers who once tuned in daily began to walk away. What could have been a moment for Joni to demonstrate humility and commitment to transparency became a crisis of leadership. Ministries that once stood by Daystar's mission no longer felt safe being associated with the network. They watched as Joni framed herself as a victim under attack while ignoring the hard questions they and their supporters needed answered. This wasn't just about programming changes. It was about the collapse of trust that had taken decades to build. Ministries left not because they wanted to, but because they felt they had to protect the integrity of their work and the trust of their followers. For many, it was heartbreaking to leave. But they believed it was necessary. As the list of departing ministries grew, Daystar struggled to fill the empty slots, relying on reruns and internal content. Viewers noticed the difference, and the network felt emptier, losing the vibrancy it once had, when ministries from around the world came together to share messages of faith and hope. In the end, the departure of ministries from Daystar became a clear signal that the controversies were too big to ignore. The once strong partnerships crumbled under the weight of unanswered questions and a refusal to address concerns with honesty. For viewers, it became a reminder that even the most trusted platforms can fall when transparency and accountability are lost. And for Joni Lamb, the ministries pulling away represented more than just lost programming. It was a visible sign that her leadership had failed to protect the very relationships that had built Daystar into what it once was, leaving behind a fractured platform and a community questioning if it could ever trust her again. When the controversies around Joni Lamb and Daystar exploded, many believed she would step forward humbly and address the serious questions being asked. They expected her to speak clearly about the allegations, the donor concerns, the family disputes, and the ministries pulling away. Instead, what people got was a defensive wall, carefully chosen words, and a leader who seemed more concerned with protecting her image than facing the hard truths. From the moment questions started to rise, Joni's public stance was to present herself as a victim of attacks. She framed the criticism as spiritual warfare, suggesting that the backlash was not about real concerns, but was the enemy trying to stop her from doing God's work. In interviews and live streams, she would speak calmly, her tone carrying an edge when tough questions came up, shifting the conversation back to her faith journey and sacrifices instead of addressing specifics. Viewers would tune in, hoping for answers about the financial controversies and the allegations of misuse of funds. But Joni would pivot to talking about her years in ministry and how much she and Marcus had sacrificed for Daystar. She leaned heavily on her past, trying to remind people why they trusted her in the first place, using stories about her family and faith to create a shield around herself. To some it felt comforting, but to many it felt like she was avoiding accountability. Whenever people asked about the rushed remarriage to Doug Weiss and the rumors of ministry funds being used for personal travel, Joni would brush it off as lies meant to destroy her. She would claim she was following God's plan and that her actions were blessed, ignoring the timeline that showed how quickly she moved on after Marcus's death. She never gave clear answers about whether donor funds were used for personal expenses, leaving viewers frustrated and suspicious. When the leaked recordings from Jonathan Lamb surfaced, where he shared concerns about how Joni was managing family and ministry matters, Joni's response was dismissive. She said she did not listen to gossip or watch videos spreading lies, framing herself as above the drama. However, it was obvious that her team was monitoring everything being said online, crafting responses, and managing damage control while blocking and deleting critical comments on her platforms. The contradiction was clear. She claimed she didn't pay attention to the criticisms, but her actions showed she was deeply aware of them. Instead of facing these issues head-on with transparency, she hid behind spiritual phrases, suggesting that those who questioned her were tools of the enemy trying to tear her down. She said things like, "The enemy doesn't attack unless you're doing something right," and "God knows my heart," using faith-based language to deflect from real concerns. To viewers who had followed Daystar for years, this was painful to watch. They had trusted Joni as a spiritual leader, someone who preached integrity and faithfulness, only to see her avoid accountability when it mattered most. The defensive posture made many feel disrespected, as if their genuine concerns were being dismissed as unimportant or evil attacks. On social media, whenever Joni posted Bible verses or faith encouragement, the comments would fill with viewers asking about the allegations, demanding transparency about donor funds, and questioning why so many ministries were leaving Daystar. Instead of engaging with these concerns, many comments were deleted and users were blocked, creating a sense of censorship and deepening the frustration of supporters who felt ignored. Behind the scenes, this defensive stance affected Daystar's staff and the environment at the network. Employees felt the tension as controversies grew, and some quietly looked for other jobs, not wanting to be tied to an organization that was losing trust. Morale dropped, and conversations within the team became more about survival than growth, as the leadership's refusal to address issues openly made it difficult to plan for the future. Churches that once partnered with Daystar also began to distance themselves, advising their congregations to be cautious about donations and questioning whether the network was still aligned with its original mission. Ministries that left Daystar cited prayerful decisions, but the underlying reason was clear. They did not want to be associated with a platform under fire for financial and ethical concerns, while its leader refused to address the issues directly. Joni's approach to handling the controversies became a case study in what not to do when trust is broken. People did not need spiritual slogans or carefully curated stories. They needed honesty, clarity, and accountability. They needed to hear Joni acknowledge the pain within her family, the concerns of donors, and the ministries walking away. Instead, they got deflection and spiritual framing that made it seem like Joni was using faith as a shield to protect herself from criticism. The longer Joni avoided these issues, the worse the damage became. Viewers who once tuned in daily began to turn away, unable to reconcile the image of faith and integrity with the defensive posture they saw. Donors who had given faithfully for years began to redirect their support to other ministries that they felt were more transparent and trustworthy. The rift between Daystar and its community grew, creating wounds that would be difficult to heal. The departure of ministries from Daystar became public proof that something was wrong, and every time Joni refused to address the real issues, it confirmed suspicions for many viewers. The controversies were no longer just about allegations. They were about how a leader responded to crisis, and Joni's choice to protect her image over addressing the concerns of her supporters left a lasting mark on her legacy.